The story begins with a missing person report filed on December 22, 2008 in Riverside County, California. The man who walked into the district attorney's office that day was Isaac Coleman, a quiet, serious-looking 30-something. He told the clerk that his older sister, Mary Coleman, born in 1976, had vanished. No one in the family had seen or heard from her, and they feared she was dead. When investigators asked Isaac who he suspected, his answer was clear. "I'm afraid of my sister's husband's family, the Baker family. I think they did something to her." At first glance, it looked like an ordinary missing person case. But in reality, this file was opening right into the middle of a disaster that had been unfolding for years. Mary and Andrew. Years earlier, Mary had married a man named Andrew Baker. The Colemans lived in Riverside County, but after the wedding, Mary moved with Andrew to New York City, into a cramped apartment in Brooklyn. Sometime later, Mary suddenly turned up back at her parents' door in California, exhausted and shaken. She told her family something that would change everything. "Andrew is forcing me into prostitution." According to the Colemans, Mary said Andrew and his relatives were using her, threatening her, and trying to push her deeper into criminal circles. The family took her back in, opened their home, and tried to protect her. But Andrew didn't let go. He called, he pushed, he demanded Mary be sent back to him. The tension rose step by step until one day it exploded. The first killing. Mary's father, Harold Coleman, was a hard, proud man. When he became convinced that his son-in-law was abusing his daughter and forcing her into sex work, something inside him snapped. In 2006, Harold confronted Andrew. The details of that confrontation would later be written in court records in cold, simple sentences. Harold picked up a shotgun, aimed at his son-in-law, and pulled the trigger. Andrew Baker died of his wounds. Harold was arrested, tried, and sentenced. He received 6 years in prison and served 4 years and 8 months. While Harold sat behind bars, the rest of the Coleman family tried to hold themselves together. A family under pressure. After Andrew's death, Mary stayed with her family. The house became crowded. Mother, Evelyn Coleman. Children, Isaac, Frank, Ashley, Emma, Mary. Sons-in-law, later Tanner Reed, Emma's husband. Grandchildren, Molly and Ryan, Mary's children. Outwardly, it looked like a broken but typical working-class American family, trying to survive a tragedy. Inside, however, something entirely different was happening. According to some of her siblings, Mary began to act strangely. They later claimed that Mary gave them drugs, tried to push some of them into prostitution, talked about organized crime and the mob, said that Andrew's relatives were involved in organ trafficking and other serious crimes. At some point, Mary went to the authorities and filed a criminal complaint against the Baker family, accusing them of forcing her and others into illegal activities. That decision, according to the Colemans, put a target on all of their backs. 10 people in one car. After Mary's complaint, the Coleman family claimed the Bakers began threatening them. They said strangers followed them. Cars slowed down in front of their house. Word spread that they were going to be killed. At some point, fear overwhelmed reason. The family abandoned their home and climbed into a single small sedan, a regular 4-door car, not a van, not an RV. For about 3 months, they lived like that, constantly moving, sleeping, sitting up, washing where they could. According to their own later statements, the people in that cramped car were Evelyn Coleman, the mother. Children, Isaac, Frank, Ashley, Emma, Mary. Emma's husband, Tanner Reed. Emma and Tanner's 2 small children, Samuel and Zoe. Mary's daughter, Molly. 10 people in a small car. The children were held on laps. Adults slept half upright. They ate whatever they could find, parking in side streets, parking lots, near the water, always afraid that the Bakers, or worse, their supposed mob connections, would find them. Eventually, they settled for a while near a cold stretch of shoreline the family later referred to as a beach near Lakeview Shore, not far from Riverside. It was there, on that shoreline, that the first disappearance happened. The night Mary vanished. The date was December 20th, 2008. The time, around 2 a.m. The car was parked near the water. Everyone was crammed inside, children half asleep, adults wrapped in coats against the night air. At some point in the early morning hours, Mary pushed the door open. "I need to go to the bathroom," she said. She stepped out into the cold, dark night. That was the last time any member of her family admits to seeing her alive. Mary never came back to the car. No one woke to see her return. No one heard her scream. In the morning, there was just an empty spot where she had been sitting. For the next 10 years, there would be no trace of her. No phone calls, no bank activity, no documented sightings. Inside the family, the explanation was simple and deadly. They believed Andrew's relatives, the Baker family, had found her, kidnapped her, and killed her for going to the authorities. Outside the family, to the police, it was just a vague story about a woman who walked away from a car at night and never came back. The second disappearance, Molly. Mary's daughter Molly was born in 2003. She was only 6 years old when her mother disappeared. After Mary vanished, the family split responsibility for the children. Her son Ryan was handed over to child services and placed in a group home. Molly stayed with her grandmother Evelyn and the rest of the Coleman household. In 2009, about a year after Mary disappeared, Molly also went missing. To neighbors and people who asked, the family reportedly gave a simple answer. Molly's uncle from the Baker side took her. Her aunt too. They came, they picked her up. For years, that explanation went unchallenged. No one filed an immediate, clear missing child case. No body was found. No grave existed in any official record. It was just a sentence, repeated when necessary. Her uncle and aunt took her. Harold walks out of prison. On January 20th, 2011, after serving nearly 5 years for killing Andrew Baker, Harold Coleman walked out of prison. He no longer knew where his family lived. They had changed addresses several times. They had lived in shelters, in cars, in borrowed apartments. Harold went to a gas station and slept there for a night. The next day, he called his son-in-law, Tanner Reed, and asked where his wife and children were. Tanner told him they were staying at a women's shelter and arranged to meet Harold at the ER entrance of a county hospital. When they met, Tanner said something that would haunt every step of the investigation that followed. "Mary is dead. She's buried near the beach at Lakeview Shore." Harold asked him, "Who killed her?" Tanner refused to answer. "Don't ask me that," he said. "Just watch your back. They're going to shoot you too. Guns are going to go off soon." After that warning, Tanner left. Days passed. Nothing happened. No one came forward. Tanner gave no further details. Harold's confusion turned into suspicion. One night, he sat down with his wife Evelyn and pressed her for the truth. Evelyn's confession to Harold. What Evelyn told her husband that night was so detailed, so structured, that detectives would later struggle to believe it was simply a lie told under pressure. According to Harold, Evelyn broke down and said, Mary had not disappeared into the night on her own. She had died in the family car. She had been punished by Tanner, beaten and denied food for days after supposedly betraying the family's location to the Bakers. After a few days of this punishment, Mary became very weak and eventually died in the car. Evelyn said that Tanner and their son Isaac waited until the rest of the family had gone to a nearby church and used that moment to move Mary's body. They put her in the car, drove to an isolated area near Lakeview Shore, and buried her secretly. Evelyn remembered asking why there had been no funeral, no proper washing of the body, no prayer. Tanner allegedly told her, "If they see the bruises, they'll blame me. It's better if no one knows." Then came the second part of Evelyn's confession, Molly, the demon inside the child. Evelyn told Harold that after Mary's death, the family became convinced something was wrong with 6-year-old Molly. Mary had previously taken the little girl to so-called healers and spiritualists. According to Evelyn, one of these people told them that evil spirits or demonic children were inside Molly and would not leave. The family began to treat Molly not as a grieving child, but as a host for something evil. They tried herbal concoctions from local health shops, strange homemade remedies. None of it worked. Molly remained anxious, difficult, sometimes acting out, like any traumatized 6-year-old who had just lost her mother. One day, in 2009, while they were staying near another small town outside Riverside, things escalated. According to Evelyn's later signed statement, Molly misbehaved and Tanner hit her in the stomach. A few hours later, someone, Evelyn blamed Tanner, gave the child 2 full glasses of rubbing alcohol to drink. Then they gave her vinegar, supposedly so the evil inside her would die. Molly began to vomit. Foam formed around her mouth. Her little body could not process what she had been forced to drink. Evelyn said she and her daughter Ashley tried to help, cleaning her when she vomited on herself. They called Tanner, but by the time he arrived, the 6-year-old girl had stopped breathing. Molly was dead. Evelyn said she washed the child's body herself, wrapped her in a white sheet like a shroud, and handed her over to Tanner. Tanner, with Ashley and Emma, allegedly put the small wrapped body into a car, drove away, and buried her in an unknown place. Evelyn claimed she still didn't know where her granddaughter's remains lay. She said she lived with deep guilt because there was no proper funeral, no prayers, no goodbye. March 31st, 2011. The homicide unit. After hearing all of this from his wife, Harold said he couldn't carry it alone. On March 31st, 2011, he walked into the homicide division of the Riverside County Sheriff's Office and asked to give a statement. He sat down with detectives and told them everything. How he had killed his son-in-law Andrew Baker in 2006 for forcing Mary into prostitution. How he had served his sentence and been released in January 2011. How Tanner had told him Mary was dead and buried near Lakeview Shore. How his wife Evelyn had then confessed that Mary was beaten, starved as punishment, and died in the car. Tanner and Isaac secretly buried her. A year later, 6-year-old Molly was forced to drink rubbing alcohol and vinegar. Molly died, was wrapped in a sheet by Evelyn, and was taken away and buried by Tanner with the help of Ashley and Emma. Harold's statement was long, detailed, and internally consistent. It read like someone trying to finally empty his conscience. Based on his account, detectives called in Evelyn Coleman next. Evelyn's official statement. When Evelyn sat in front of the detectives, she didn't deny it. She gave her own long, structured statement, filling in details, repeating the same core elements. Mary had been in conflict with the Baker family and had gone to the authorities about them. After that, the Coleman family had lived in a car for months out of fear. Mary had been punished by Tanner, beaten, denied food, and had died in the car. Tanner and Isaac had taken her body while the others were at church and buried her near the shoreline. About 13 months later, Molly, already considered spiritually disturbed, was hit in the stomach by Tanner and later forced to drink rubbing alcohol and vinegar. The child collapsed, foaming at the mouth and unable to breathe. Evelyn washed and wrapped her, and Tanner, Ashley, and Emma took the body away and buried it. She admitted that neither Mary nor Molly had a proper funeral service. She admitted knowing they were dead. She admitted the burial was secret and illegal. Her words directly implicated her son-in-law Tanner as the main actor, his son Isaac, her daughters Ashley and Emma. This was not a statement meant to protect her children. It was a statement that burned almost the entire family. Investigators opened a double homicide investigation, a case that wouldn't end. From 2011 onward, the Coleman family case crawled its way through the justice system. 2011, first wave of statements and arrests. 2014, hearings, changes in prosecutors. 2015, new judges, new defense strategies. 2018, still no bodies, no known burial sites, no physical evidence confirming where Mary or Molly were. Over and over, files were passed from one desk to another. Detectives retired or were reassigned. Prosecutors changed. Judges moved to other courts. Everyone agreed on one thing. If even half of what Harold and Evelyn had said was true, something monstrous had happened inside that family. But there was a problem. No bodies, no grave, no forensic confirmation, and then another twist. Evelyn tries to take it back. After years of waiting, fear, and pressure, Evelyn Coleman began to change her story. She said that yes, she had given that statement, but it wasn't the truth. According to her new version, members of Andrew Baker's extended family had threatened her. They told her to blame Tanner for the deaths, or they would kill her children. She claimed she had been under such fear that she made things up and put it all on Tanner to save her family. But there was a major problem with that claim. Her original statement had not only blamed Tanner, it had also implicated her own son Isaac and her daughters Ashley and Emma. It wasn't a simple, panicked lie to protect her children. It was a carefully structured story that made almost everyone in the family look guilty. When asked whether the signed statement the detectives had in front of them was true or false, Evelyn hesitated. Sometimes she said it was true. Sometimes she insisted it wasn't. Sometimes she said her mind had been confused. Between her first confession and her later denials, one fact never changed. Mary Coleman, born 1976, had disappeared in December 2008 and never been seen again. Molly, born 2003, had been missing since 2009, with no credible proof that any aunt or uncle had ever taken her. 2 people were gone. No graves, no bodies, no goodbyes. And somewhere beneath all the contradictions, threats, and shifting stories, the truth about what really happened to Mary and Molly Coleman was still buried. The more investigators dug into the Coleman family case, the stranger it became. By this point, 2 people were gone. Mary Coleman vanished in 2008. Her daughter Molly, gone since 2009. And yet, Whenever anyone pressed the family for the truth, their stories twisted and broke like glass. Who are you protecting? Inside the Coleman family, arguments were constant. When the question came up, who is really responsible, your son or your son-in-law? Evelyn could never give a straight answer. Sometimes she hinted that her son-in-law Tanner was dangerous. Sometimes she hinted that her son Isaac knew more than he admitted. Other times she tried to protect both of them and blamed outsiders. At one point she claimed that Molly hadn't been killed at all, but had simply been handed over to relatives from the Baker side. People like Aunt Fatma and Emil in the original Turkish story, now recast as Andrew Baker's aunts and cousins. According to Evelyn's newer version, 3 people from the Baker family had come to them and said, "Give us the child, we'll take care of her." She said Molly ran to them, hugged one of the men, and called him uncle, then left with them willingly. But the details did not make sense. Molly was 6 years old. She had barely met Andrew's extended family in her life. Even other family members asked quietly, how would she run to an uncle she never really knew and cling to him like that? How would she recognize him at all? Bits of truth and invention mixed together until no one outside the family knew what to believe. The witness at the tree. Then came a new voice, a neighbor. Not from a television studio, but from real life. A man who had lived near one of the places the Colemans used to stay. He remembered a day he would never forget. Near the edge of Lakeview Shore, close to an abandoned dog shelter, there was an old fig tree. The shelter sat between Riverside County and a neighboring township, a forgotten corner of land where people rarely went. One afternoon, this neighbor walked past and saw something that froze him where he stood. Mary. She was tied to the tree. Not just standing there, bound to the trunk outside in the open air. He walked closer and demanded an explanation. Why is she tied up like this? According to him, Tanner answered calmly, she's being punished. She's in trouble. The neighbor warned him, if you don't untie her, I'll call the police. After that, he said, they finally loosened the rope and freed her. Later that night, he said, Tanner came to his house around 9 or 10 p.m. and asked to borrow tools, a shovel, a pickaxe, an axe. The neighbor assumed they were going to cut firewood or do some digging on the property. He lent the tools and went back home. The next day, Tanner returned the shovel, pickaxe and axe. They were perfectly clean. Washed, dried, not a speck of dried mud on them. Soon after that, Mary was gone. When the police later came to the neighbor's home, asking if he had any information about Mary and her 2 children, he says he told them he knew nothing. He stayed silent. It wasn't until years later, when he heard rumors that Mary had been killed and buried, that everything he had seen that day, the rope around the tree, the borrowed tools, the spotless metal, began to feel like pieces of a much darker puzzle. Evelyn's shifting story. In her original statement, Evelyn had admitted that Tanner punished Mary and withheld food, and that after this period of punishment, Mary fell ill and died. When confronted with the neighbor's story about the tree, she tried to minimize it. Maybe, she said, Mary had gone without food once. Maybe she had been scolded, but tied to a tree as punishment. Evelyn denied it or brushed it off. Where would I even find a rope? We only had scarves and belts. We were living in a car, not on a farm. Yet the neighbor insisted on what he had seen. Mary, tied under a fig tree near the old dog shelter. The argument, the threat to call the police. Tanner later asking for shovel, pickaxe, axe, the tools returning spotless. Layered onto that were Evelyn's own earlier words, written and signed. Mary had betrayed the family by giving away their hiding place. Tanner had punished her. After beatings and starvation, she had died. Tanner and Isaac had buried her near Lakeview Shore. Now, with eyes on her, she tried to pull everything back. Maybe I exaggerated. Maybe I was confused. Maybe they threatened me. Maybe I lied to protect my children. But the written record remained. Tanner's counterattack. She drugged me, under suspicion for both Mary's and Molly's deaths. Tanner tried to turn the accusations around. He claimed that Mary had been the dangerous one. In one statement, he went so far as to say that Mary had given him drugs and sexually assaulted him. He described himself as a victim of a woman who had overpowered him with narcotics and forced herself on him. For investigators, it was one of the strangest claims in the entire case file. A man, accused of killing a woman and a child, suddenly saying, "She raped me." The more he spoke, the more his story changed. Dates shifted. Details contradicted earlier statements. What never changed was his insistence that he was not the monster, but the martyr. A pattern of stories. The lost child at the mosque. Years before all of this, there had been another scandal around Tanner. Back then, it wasn't about Mary or Molly. It was about his own 4-year-old child. He used to tell a story like this. He had taken his young son to a famous mosque in a big city. The Americanized file places it somewhere like a large urban church or landmark, but in the original Turkish version, it was Eyüp Sultan Mosque in Istanbul. According to Tanner, he had gone inside to pray, leaving the child in the courtyard with relatives. When he came back, the boy was gone. Tanner claimed that masked men had kidnapped his son. Organ traffickers had taken him. Dark forces, mysterious, faceless criminals, were behind it all. The child was eventually found, but with needle marks on his body, serious psychological trauma, behavioral problems. The case briefly attracted media attention. Tanner appeared before cameras, talking about organ mafias, masked kidnappers, and satanic forces. Yet even in that case, his story changed every time he told it. Sometimes he said he was right next to the child. Sometimes he said he was inside praying. Sometimes he said police had never questioned him. Other times he said police had harassed him and beaten him. To doctors and social workers, it looked less like a targeted conspiracy and more like a child who had suffered violence and neglect. Probably closer to home than Tanner wanted to admit. Social services and the neighbors. Over time, the same pattern appeared again and again around the Colemans. Bruised children, domestic violence, reports from neighbors, visits from social workers. In one neighborhood, residents remembered police cars, ambulances, and social services arriving early in the morning. Neighbors later said the children were beaten, the mother was beaten, the father was controlling and violent. People in the building eventually reported them. Child Protective Services came. The children were examined. Some were removed from the home. Tanner, in his version, claimed that the police had attacked him. They had thrown tear gas into his apartment. They were trying to lock him in a psychiatric ward. His enemies were manipulating social workers and psychologists to destroy him. To neighbors, it looked much simpler. A loud, volatile man who beat his wife and children, then insisted he was the victim. A collective collapse. From the outside, the Coleman family case began to look less like a single crime and more like a collective collapse of reality. A father who killed his son-in-law, then came out of prison to accuse his own family. A mother who confessed, in detail, to covering up 2 deaths, then tried to deny her own words. A son-in-law who blamed demons, organ traffickers, masked kidnappers, police, and finally the dead woman herself. Neighbors who saw a woman tied to a tree, heard pleas for tools, watched the family spin into chaos. Children removed by the state after signs of abuse. 2 missing people, Mary and Molly, with no graves, no bodies, and no closure. Somewhere inside this maze of lies, fear, religious obsession, poverty, and paranoia, the truth still existed. A woman disappeared. A 6-year-old girl vanished. And in the middle of it all stood a family that seemed determined to destroy itself rather than simply say what really happened. As the years passed, the story of the Coleman family spread far beyond their cramped car and the shoreline where Mary had vanished. Wherever they went, they left behind frightened neighbors, battered children, and people who would later say, "We knew something was wrong. We just didn't know how bad it really was." A family everyone was afraid of. In one low-income neighborhood where the Colemans had briefly rented a ground-floor apartment, the community still remembered them. People whispered that Tanner was violent, that he beat his wife and children, that he shouted late into the night about demons, enemies, and police conspiracies. Some neighbors admitted that they wanted to help the children, but they were afraid of him. "He was different," one neighbor would later say. "Wild beard, wild eyes, we were scared of him." Inside the apartment, the Colemans were convinced it was the outside world that was dangerous. Evelyn later claimed the entire building watched them, listened at the door, spied on them. "I had to keep the windows shut," she said. "If I opened them, everyone would be there, listening." In reality, people weren't listening for secrets. They were listening for screams, the psychologist and the restraining order. Eventually, social services intervened. A state-employed psychologist from the local health department evaluated the children and concluded that they were not safe in that home. Bruises, fear, strange stories. There was enough cause to remove them. Some of the Coleman children were placed under state protection. For Tanner and Evelyn, it became another piece of the conspiracy. To them, the psychologist was not a professional doing her job. She was an enemy. Evelyn and Tanner blamed her personally for stealing their children. Tanner confronted the psychologist in public, threatened and harassed her. She went to the police and obtained a restraining order under laws designed to protect women from domestic violence and stalking. The order was clear. Tanner was not allowed to approach her. He was not allowed to contact or intimidate her. Violating the order would have consequences. He violated it anyway. One day, he crossed her path on a busy street and began to bother her again. She reported it. Officers were sent to pick him up and bring him in under the court order. When they reached the Coleman apartment, the situation exploded. The siege at the ground floor apartment. Police knocked and ordered Tanner and Emma to open the door. They refused. From behind the bars of the ground floor window, they shouted that no one would take them alive, that no officer would step inside. Each of them was holding a knife. According to the police report, Tanner also held an axe. Inside the small apartment sat a propane tank for cooking. Tanner grabbed a bottle of lighter fluid, poured it over the tank, waved a lighter, and yelled that he would blow himself and the building up if they tried to enter. Negotiators were called. Streets were blocked. Residents watched from behind their own curtains as officers tried for hours to talk Tanner down. Eventually, the standoff ended without an explosion. But the message was clear. This was not a man who would ever accept that the state had any right to question him. To the Colemans, it became one more proof that the government, psychologists, police, all of them, were out to destroy them. To everyone else, it was a warning sign that had been flashing for years. A rural witness. They tortured that girl. Far from the city, in a small farming community where the Colemans had once stayed during a seasonal harvest, another neighbor still remembered a different kind of fear. He recalled Molly, the little girl with tangled hair and tired eyes, living with the family out in the country. According to him, the child was not just neglected, she was tormented. He claimed Molly was beaten and choked. Her hands were burned with hot oil as punishment. She was kept hungry and dirty, shut in rooms, dragged out only to be yelled at or hit. He said this abuse went on not for days, but for months. At one point, the family left town to go do seasonal farm work, the hazy American equivalent of the original story's hazelnut fields, and took Molly with them. When they returned, the girl was gone. They came back without her, he later told investigators. They said she'd gone to relatives, but no one ever saw her again. His account matched another pattern in the official records, a timeline in which, in mid-2009, the family traveled for seasonal work with Molly and came back without her. The Colemans, as always, had an explanation. They said they had given the child to relatives on the father's side, people like Uncle Hallett and Aunt Emin in the original account, now recast as shadowy Baker relatives in the Americanized file. They claimed Molly had run to them, calling them Uncle, happy to go, but no one could ever produce a clear address, a school record, a doctor's file, a photograph, any independent proof that Molly had been alive in their care. Molly simply disappeared from the world. Organ mafias, murdered grandmothers, and the endless conspiracy. As investigators continued to untangle the Coleman story, the accusations grew. According to different family members at different times, an organ mafia was stalking them. A beloved grandmother had actually been poisoned and killed to protect dark secrets. Enemies had paid large sums of money to police and others to cover up crimes. Every neighbor who spoke out was part of a plot. Every social worker, psychologist, and officer who acted against them was corrupt. They spoke of masked men stealing children from churchyards, of needles in infants, of cemeteries where exhumations would supposedly reveal mass murder. Some of these stories contained grains of truth, a missing child later found with injection marks, a psychiatrist recommending hospitalization, a judge signing a protection order. But around those small truths, the Colemans built cathedrals of paranoia. Every bruise became proof of a conspiracy. Every intervention became an attack. Every accusation against Tanner became, in their telling, a lie planted by enemies, demons, or both. Two names at the center of the storm. Beneath the layers of rumor, fear, and delusion, the core of the case never changed. Two names kept appearing in the files. Mary Coleman, the daughter who vanished after walking away from the car near the shore. Molly Coleman, her 6-year-old child, who disappeared sometime the following year. Everything else, the accusations, the denials, the TV appearances in the original Turkish case, the fights with psychologists, the standoffs with police, the talk of organ mafias and demons, swirled around those two silent absences. Mary, Molly, no school records after 2009. No hospital visits, no credible sightings, no graves, only a family tearing itself apart in public, insisting that everyone else was lying, while the only people who could truly answer what happened to a mother and her daughter either refused to speak clearly, or had already said too much and were now trying desperately to take it back. For years, Mary's grandfather carried around a quiet certainty. They killed her, he told anyone who would listen. They killed both of them. He couldn't prove it. But the story he pieced together from fragments, lies, and half-confessions was darker than anything in the official files. A grandfather who wouldn't let it go. In the Americanized record, he appears as Matthew Coleman, an old man in his 70s, shuffling between bus stations, police stations, and county offices with a folded piece of paper in his pocket and two names in his mind. Mary Coleman, Molly Coleman. The last time he'd seen his daughter Evelyn, her life had been stable. She and her husband Harold had a 4-story house, another apartment in the city, a steady income. They weren't rich, but they were secure. Then Tanner entered the family. According to Matthew, everything collapsed once Tanner became the one who handled things. He convinced Evelyn to sign over the family home. He got access to Harold's old city apartment. When Mary's husband Alex died, Mary received insurance and severance pay from his job. Tanner pushed her to give that money to him too. "Let me open a business. I'll take care of all of you." The business never appeared. The money vanished. Mary, newly widowed and frightened, had also put her savings and jewelry into Evelyn's hands for safekeeping. Those too slipped into Tanner's orbit and never came back. When Mary finally demanded, "Give me my money back then," she found herself rebranded as the problem, the ungrateful one, the rebellious daughter, and then she was gone. They took her organs. The family's paranoia didn't stop at money. Around the kitchen table, whispers grew sharper. Evelyn's siblings claimed that Matthew's elderly wife, Mary's grandmother, hadn't just died. She'd been given a death injection, so certain secrets would never surface. Organ traffickers were involved. Powerful people were paying to keep everything quiet. Matthew didn't see any of that with his own eyes. What he did hear, clearly, was his own daughter Evelyn saying, "They gave your wife something so she wouldn't wake up again." He listened to them talk about organ mafias, poisoned grandmothers, bought-off officials, and hidden money. All while they continued to live in houses and drive a car that had been bought with Mary's compensation and the sale of family property. In Matthew's mind, it all connected: the sudden sale of homes and the vanishing money, the manipulations, the disappearing women and children. Someone was cleaning the table before anyone could ask where the food had gone. Curses in the walls. Tanner didn't just isolate the family financially, he isolated them mentally. Evelyn's siblings, the ones who tried to warn her not to hand over the properties, became the enemy. Jealous, cursed, dangerous. When they begged her, "Don't sign away your house, don't give him everything," Tanner countered with a different story. He claimed they had cursed the home. According to Matthew, Tanner told Evelyn that her siblings had placed evil charms in the walls, pried out bricks and pulled out paper amulets as proof. Convinced the whole Coleman household that the house itself was spiritually contaminated. The police who later entered that same house found holes in the walls, plaster chipped away, bricks pulled out, as if someone had been hunting for something hidden. To the officers, it looked like superstition and fear. To Matthew, it looked like control. Once someone convinces you that your own blood has cursed you, the person offering protection gains enormous power. That person, in this case, was Tanner. The search that went nowhere. When the Colemans suddenly disappeared from their 4-story home, Matthew panicked. He went first to the house. A stranger answered the door. "They sold and left," the woman said. "We don't know where they went." At the local office, a clerk pulled up the records. "They transferred their registration," he told Matthew. "They're listed now in another county near a small town." Matthew traveled there and found nothing. No address, no daughter, no grandchildren. He went to a police station, hoping they could trace the family through the local systems. The desk sergeant listened, then said coldly, "Even if I knew which house they were in, I couldn't tell you. That's not how it works." Matthew left with nothing more than a phone number for a prison. He called around, searching for his son-in-law Harold, the man who had gone to prison years earlier for killing Mary's first husband. One facility finally confirmed. He was here. He's been released. More dead ends. So he tried one more place, the precinct near Lakeview Shore, where he had heard stories about Mary's disappearance. There, a commander pulled up the system and said something that transformed Matthew's suspicion into certainty. "Your daughter is listed as living at Old Quarry Road, House 46, he said. "She checked into a hospital here just a few days ago." Matthew was stunned. After months of chasing shadows, he suddenly had an address. He went there. The house was there. The neighborhood was there. Mary was not. Only Evelyn came to the door. The prison confession. Still unable to find Mary or Molly, Matthew decided to go straight to the one person who might know what the family was hiding. Harold, freshly released from prison. He tracked him down and sat across from him, face to face. What Harold told him aligned with the earlier signed statements in the case file, even if he spoke in his own rough language. He said Mary had died in the car where the family had been living. He said Tanner and Isaac had taken her body to the shoreline near Lakeview and buried her there. He said that Molly had also died after some kind of spirit cleansing ritual involving alcohol. "They gave her something to drink," Harold told him. "She choked, foamed at the mouth. They wrapped her up and took her away." He described Evelyn as thin as a ghost, her mind shattered by fear and manipulation, sitting silently as Tanner controlled every decision. "They all follow him," Harold said. "They're all in his head. I'm the only one who sees it." He claimed that when the police had briefly intercepted the family by the shore, they had searched Isaac's pockets and found Mary's ID and bank card on him. More proof, in Harold's mind, that someone in that car knew exactly where Mary was and what had happened to her. To Matthew, it was confirmation of what he had always suspected. His daughter and granddaughter were not missing. They were gone. Later, when the Colemans moved for a time to a small farm town to do seasonal harvest work, they crossed paths with another witness. A farmer who would years later show investigators a dry well behind the house and say, "If they did anything to that girl, it happened while they were here." In that town, the family rented a small one-story house with a big yard. Neighbors saw Tanner's 2 biological children playing outside in the dirt, chasing each other between the trees. They almost never saw Molly. When asked why the girl didn't come out to play, Tanner had an answer ready. "Her mother is working with organ traffickers," he said. "They'll come for her. If I let her outside, they'll steal her." He told this calmly, as if it were nothing more than a weather report. The farmer remembered going to the house once and being deliberately kept away from one room. "Whenever I visited, they would move that girl into another room and close the door," he recalled. "They said it was better this way." Later, when the family said they were leaving to pick crops in another region, the farmer offered to drive them to the bus with his tractor. They went with no Molly in sight. Days later, he received a phone call from Evelyn. "Molly is gone," she said. "She's missing." When he asked Tanner what had happened, Tanner replied, "Her aunt came. We gave her to family." But the farmer never saw that aunt. No neighbor ever did. No school, no clinic, no caseworker in that wider region ever confirmed the existence of a living, present Molly. It was as if she had been erased. Years later, based on statements that Evelyn, Harold, and other family members originally gave and then tried to retract, investigators would come back to that same property. They would look at the cracked stone ring of the old well, at the patch of ground that had once been pointed out as a possible burial site. They would dig. They would find nothing they could definitively tie to a crime. But the absence of bones did not erase the record. A child abused, a child kept hidden, a child who existed in memories and files, and then didn't. The center of the storm. By now, the pattern surrounding the Coleman family looked like this. Money moved from weak hands to stronger ones. Houses were sold, deeds transferred, cash disappeared. Curses and amulets were used to turn relatives into enemies. Police, psychologists, neighbors, and social workers became villains in a story where Tanner was always the victim. Elderly grandparents died in ways everyone insisted were normal, until someone whispered otherwise. A young widow vanished, her 6-year-old daughter vanished. And at the center of every financial decision, every story, every accusation, every threatened explosion, every whispered demon, there was one name the grandfather could never stop saying: Tanner. To the state, the Coleman file was a tangle of conflicting statements, recanted confessions, unproven allegations, and unsuccessful searches. To Matthew, it was simple. His daughter and granddaughter had walked into Tanner's world, and they had never walked back out. When the officers arrive at the little farm town, the sky is the color of wet concrete and the fields are bare. They stand at the edge of a yard, in front of a low, single-story house with flaking paint and a crooked fence. A man named Hassan waits for them, hands buried in his pockets, eyes on the ground. He has carried this unease for years. Inside this house, once Tanner and Evelyn and the children lived. Molly, too. The well. Hassan leads the gendarmes through the gate and into the yard. There was a well, he says, right here. Now it is covered, stones stacked over a concrete ring, earth tamped down, weeds climbing over the edge. But in his mind it is still open, dark, bottomless. Years earlier, when the Coleman family arrived in his village, they were strange but unremarkable at first, poor, quiet, keeping to themselves. Tanner drove an old, tired car. Evelyn seemed half present, often looking somewhere far beyond the person in front of her. The children, though, were impossible to miss. Tanner's 2 younger ones chased chickens and kicked dust in the yard. They shouted, laughed, fought, and ran. Molly did none of that. She was kept inside. When Hassan asked why, Tanner answered with the same calm certainty he always used when inventing a new reality. Her mother is working with organ traffickers, he said. They'll come for her. If I let her out, they'll steal her. Hassan didn't believe it. But how do you argue with a man whose entire life is built on stories only he can see? Sometimes Hassan visited to offer help. Whenever he did, Molly was moved to another room, the door shut quickly. "It's better like this," they would say. Later, when the family said they were going to pick crops near the city, Hassan offered his tractor. He drove Tanner and the children toward the main road. Molly did not ride with them. Days later, the phone rang. "Molly is gone," Evelyn's voice cracked through the line. "She's missing." Tanner told Hassan that an aunt had come. The girl had been given to family. Hassan didn't believe that either, so when plainclothes officers came years later and asked if he had ever suspected anything, Hassan pointed to the one place that had always bothered him. "If they did something to that girl," he said, "it could have been here." He showed them the well. Now, in February 2016, gendarmes strip off their jackets and climb down into the ring. Buckets of foul water and mud are hauled up. A pump groans. The work lasts all day. They find nothing. No bones, no scrap of cloth, just silt and silence. But the emptiness of the well doesn't ease Hassan's mind. It only makes the story stranger. The tree by the river. There is another story, another place. It belongs to Anna, Evelyn's younger daughter, the one who once tried to tell everything and then spent years trying to swallow her own words. In 2011, sitting in a small interrogation room with her hands shaking on the table, Anna spoke in a flat, exhausted voice. Molly had been ill, more than once. Her stomach swelled. She cried in pain. Doctors had helped for a time, then the family moved and the illness returned. Tanner didn't go to a clinic this time. He went to someone who dealt in curses and spirits, someone who told him that there were dark beings inside the child, and that these would leave if she drank something strong enough to burn them out. So one afternoon in a crowded, dirty kitchen, Tanner, Evelyn, Anna, and Evelyn's older daughter stood around a bottle of industrial alcohol. They poured it into a cup. They forced Molly to drink. Anna said Tanner made the others take a little as well, so it would look shared, so no one could later say it was only the girl who'd been poisoned. Within an hour, Molly's head began to spin. Within 2, she fell, foam at her lips, body limp, chest struggling, then stopping. According to Anna's first statement, Evelyn did what mothers have done for centuries when death comes to a child in a house no one trusts. She heated water. She washed the small body with soap. She wrapped Molly in a sheet like a shroud. Then Tanner lifted the bundle in his arms, and the 3 adults, Tanner, Evelyn, Anna, carried her out to the car. Night had already swallowed the road when they drove. The highway signs flashed past until a smaller one appeared. Lakeview, Gulkant. They turned down a narrow track that slipped between trees and brush until it ended at the bank of a wide, dark river. The Sakarya. There, under the leaning branches of an old tree, Tanner took a shovel from the trunk and began to dig. The ground was damp and heavy. The hole rose only to his knees. He lowered the small, wrapped body into the earth. No coffin, no boards, just fabric, soil, and water-heavy roots. They covered her. They walked back to the car. In her statement, Anna remembered details no one had asked for. The way the shovel hit a stone and sparked. The color of the sheet. The fact that there were no planks, unlike the graves they had known as children. Years later, when investigators returned with her to show the place, it was not police who led them. It was Anna herself. They drove along the Gulkent Road, turned onto an unmarked dirt lane, pushed through underbrush, and stepped out at the river's edge. The spot she indicated, a particular tree on the bank, was the one excavated by heavy machinery. Dirt, roots, and stones flew aside as the scoop tore up the ground. Again, nothing. No remains and no cloth, no child. The children who were saved. Long before the siege, long before the tear gas and the shouts, there was a doctor in a small clinic who saw something nobody else had managed to document. Tanner had brought his 2 younger children for a routine visit. They were thin. They were jumpy. They flinched at sudden movement and fell silent whenever Tanner spoke. Under their clothes, the doctor saw bruises at different stages of healing. She listened to the way they talked about things in the walls, shadowy beings watching them, the fear of leaving the house. She heard how they never seemed to go to school. When the family left, she sat for a long time, staring at the door. Then she wrote a report to Child Protection Services. Social workers came. They saw what she had seen, and more, a filthy apartment. Children who knew more about demons and curses than about letters or numbers. A mother so frightened she could barely make eye contact. The state took the children into care. For Tanner, this was proof that the world was against him. For the children, it was the first act of rescue in a life where everything else had been bargaining and fear. The siege. When the police come for Tanner and Evelyn, it is not for Molly or Mary. Not officially. It is for threats and assault. Tanner has already gone after the clinic psychologist, blaming her for stealing his children. He has been charged once. A restraining order has been granted. Then, in defiance of that order, he approaches the woman again on the street. She calls for help. The case file grows heavier. Now, by court instruction, officers are sent to bring Tanner to the station, presented in person, for violating the order and for ongoing threats. They knock on the apartment door in the basement of a tired concrete block. "Open up!" Inside, Tanner and Evelyn freeze. They do not open. They will not come out. Instead, they appear at the lower windows, faces half hidden, shouting that no one will take them alive. They hold knives. Tanner brandishes a hatchet. Behind them, on the linoleum, stands a gas cylinder. When negotiations begin, the apartment building is evacuated. Elderly neighbors hurry down the stairs in slippers and coats, guided past parked patrol cars and an ambulance. Officers set up a cordon. A tactical team arrives. Specially trained negotiators take over. Inside, Tanner rants about conspiracies, demons, curses, organ traffickers, rival relatives, and corrupt police. He insists the state is trying to erase him, just as they erased Mary and Molly. At some point, he pours lighter fluid over the gas cylinder and promises to blow the building up, with himself and Evelyn inside. 4 hours pass. The negotiators plead, reason, flatter, threaten. Tanner twists every sentence into another proof of his persecution. He insists he will only leave if the entire world hears his version first. From the street, the apartment looks like a dull, grey box. Inside, it is a pressure cooker. Finally, the prosecutor gives permission. "Use gas," comes the order. Tear gas canisters are fired through the small windows. Glass shatters. Smoke blooms through the cramped rooms. Coughing, eyes streaming, Tanner and Evelyn stumble out, knives forgotten, hands pressed against their faces. They are pushed to the ground, cuffed, carried away. The gas dissipates. Neighbors drift back to their homes. The building returns to a fragile normal, what the records remember. In the years that follow, the case files swell. Confessions given, signed, then retracted. Maps marked with X's at a well, at a tree by a river, at a half-finished road near the lake. Reports from doctors, social workers, police negotiators, neighbors, farmers. Statements from relatives, Isaac, Anna, Fatih, describing poison, beatings, shallow graves, sheets used as shrouds. Each time someone speaks, the truth seems to come into focus. Each time they recant, it slips away again. They blame the Tunnel family, the enemies, the mafia, the demons, the police, the media, each other. But beneath the smoke and movement, a few things remain still. Mary left the car to use a toilet one night and never came back. Molly was once a real child, living and breathing, seen by neighbors and relatives. Both of them vanished in a family where everyone else seemed to orbit around one man's stories. Every trail leads back, in one way or another, to Tanner. The state calls it a complex, unresolved case, a tangle of inconsistencies and missing physical evidence. Matthew does not. For him, standing in his small kitchen with 2 framed photographs on the table, one of Mary, one of Molly, there is nothing complex left. He knows that somewhere, in a field or by a river or under a tree, the earth is holding his girls. And he knows that the man who spun curses into control, who turned love into fear and family into followers, walked that ground at least once, shovel in hand, while the world was still looking the other way. The town is small enough that everyone hears the sirens. Beyond the last row of grey apartment blocks, fields lie empty under a low, heavy sky. In one of those blocks, in a damp basement flat, a family has been hiding from the world for years. This is where the story of Mary and Molly keeps circling back. No matter who talks, no matter who lies, no matter who recants, it always returns to this concrete box. And to Tanner. Mary was the first to disappear. She was a young mother who lived too long inside other people's decisions. When the family abandoned their home and began living in a car, she went with them. When they fled from one city to another because of enemies only Tanner could see, she followed. One night, on a cold shoreline road, the car pulled over near a public restroom. "I need the toilet," Mary said, and stepped out into the dark. According to the family, she never came back. They would repeat that same line for years. She went to the toilet and never returned. No one called the police that night. No one searched the area with flashlights. Nobody knocked on doors. Mary simply dissolved into Tanner's story. Another threat, another shadow, another warning. The details changed with every retelling, but the ending stayed the same. She was gone, and it was somehow her fault. Molly's story is worse. When the Colemans arrived in the village of Farizli Kushcha, they rented a single-story house with a large yard and an old stone well. Tanner and his wife Evelyn brought their 2 younger children and Mary's little girl Molly. From the first day, something was wrong. Tanner's own children played in the yard, running between the trees, laughing, falling, getting up again. Molly did not. She was kept indoors, like a secret the house wasn't built to hold. When Hassan, the neighbor, asked why she never came out, Tanner didn't hesitate. "Her mother works with organ traffickers," he said calmly. "They'll come and take her. I can't let her be seen." It was a ridiculous explanation. But in this family, absurdity was normal. Organ mafias, demons in the walls, curses written into plaster, enemies waiting in every parked car. Slowly, quietly, the village began to worry about the girl they almost never saw. Sometimes Hassan visited. When he did, Molly was moved into another room, behind another door. Once, he noticed faint marks on her arms. Another time, he saw fear in her eyes so sharp it lingered in his mind for days. Then harvest season came. Tanner and his 2 younger children needed a ride to the city to pick hazelnuts. Hassan helped them, loaded them into his tractor, and drove them toward the main road. Molly did not go with them. A few days later, the phone rang. "Molly is missing," Evelyn said. "She's gone." Tanner's new explanation was simple. "Her aunt came and took her. She's with family now." Hassan didn't believe that. Not then, not now. So when investigators knocked on his door years later and asked if he had any suspicions, any place that felt wrong, his mind went straight to the one black mouth of earth he had never trusted. "If they got rid of her," he said, pointing into his own yard, "they could have used the well." The gendarmes spent a winter day emptying that old stone throat. Mud, trash, stagnant water, everything. They found nothing. The well swallowed their efforts and gave back only silence. But the earth remembers more than any witness. In April 2011, Anna, Evelyn's younger daughter, sat in a police station and spoke in a low, tired voice. Her story did not begin with a well. It began with a bottle. According to Anna, Molly had been sick more than once. Her stomach would swell. She complained of pain. Doctors had helped for a while, but the family didn't stay in one place long enough for anyone to follow up. In the new city, Tanner didn't choose a hospital. He chose a man who talked about spirits. The healer told him there were dark beings inside the girl, clinging to her like invisible leeches. If they wanted them out, they had to burn them out from the inside. "Give her strong alcohol," the man supposedly said. "The spirits will leave." So one afternoon, inside a cramped, dirty kitchen, Tanner, Evelyn, Anna, and Evelyn's older daughter stood around a bottle of industrial spirit. They poured the clear liquid into a glass. They held Molly's jaw. They forced it down her throat. To make it look fair, to make future blame harder to place, Tanner made everyone else take a sip too. Within an hour, Molly was dizzy. Within 2, she collapsed. Foam at her mouth, her small body jerking, then going still. Anna said Tanner tried to help by hitting her in the stomach, trying to drive out the demons he had invented. It changed nothing. The child was dead. In Anna's first statement, Evelyn did what she had watched other women do with their dead in quieter times. She heated water. She washed Molly's body with soap. She wrapped her in a white sheet, like a shroud without a prayer. Then Tanner took the bundle in his arms, and they carried her to the car. Night swallowed the road when they left the house behind. They drove until the lights of the city fell away. Along one narrow road, a sign appeared in the headlights. Gulkant, Lakeview. They turned. The car crawled down a dirt track between trees until it stopped near the bank of a wide, dark river, the Sakarya. There, under the leaning branches of a single large tree, Tanner opened the trunk and pulled out a shovel. And Anna remembered the sound it made when it hit a buried stone. She remembered that the hole never rose above his knees. She remembered there was no wooden coffin, no planks, nothing but earth and fabric. They laid Molly's wrapped body in the shallow grave. They covered her with soil. They turned away. Years later, when officers asked Anna to show the place, she led them back to that same riverbank, step by step, turn by turn, without a map. Under the tree she pointed to, they dug again. They found nothing. Between these 2 empty places, the well and the riverside, runs a line of broken testimonies. Relatives confess, then retract. Mother blames son, daughter blames stepfather. Everyone blames the other family or the mafia or the demons. Tanner always survives the story he tells. He talks about organ traffickers, about curses, about enemies poisoning his food, about spirits living in his walls. He claims Mary drugged him and assaulted him. He claims Molly was stolen. He claims the world is against him. But there are things his stories cannot swallow. Mary left the car for a toilet one night and never came back. Molly lived in that house. Neighbors saw her, heard her name, then never saw her again. Both disappearances happened under the rule of the same man, in the gravity of the same mind. The state calls it a complex contradictory case. A maze of statements, a lack of physical evidence, a tragedy buried under lies. For Matthew, the grandfather who walked from city to city, from police station to police station just asking, "Have you seen my girls?" There is nothing complex left. Somewhere, maybe by a river, maybe under a tree, maybe in a field the cameras never reached, the earth knows where Mary and Molly are. Tanner knows more than he will ever admit. And a country that watched this story unfold on television still lives with the same quiet, unanswered question. When a whole family decides to believe a lie, who will speak for the children that never had a choice?